Maria wiped down the marble countertop in the kitchen, her movements practiced and efficient after 3 years of working in the Blackwood mansion. At 52, she had learned to make herself invisible. That's what good help did in houses like this. You cleaned, you cooked, you kept your head down, and you went home. The Connecticut estate sprawled across 5 acres, with more rooms than Maria could count when she first arrived. Now she knew every corner, every creaky floorboard, every window that needed extra elbow grease. The pay was decent, much better than what she could find elsewhere, and Mr. Blackwood never bothered her much. He was rarely home anyway. What broke her heart, though, was the boy. Daniel was 8 years old, and he spent most of his days wandering the empty halls like a little ghost. Born blind, he relied on his other senses to navigate the world. Maria would watch him trail his fingers along the walls, counting steps, memorizing the layout of his own home. His nanny, a young woman named Beth, was supposed to care for him. But Beth spent most of her time scrolling through her phone, barely looking up when Daniel called for her. The boy's mother had died 2 years ago. Cancer, the other staff members whispered. After that, Mr. Blackwood threw himself into his real estate business with almost frightening intensity. He traveled constantly, closing deals in New York, Los Angeles, Dubai, Singapore. When he was home, he locked himself in his study, barking orders into his phone until late into the night. Daniel was left alone. A blind child in a mansion full of expensive things he couldn't see, with a father who was never there and a nanny who didn't care. Maria understood loneliness. She'd left her own life behind in Colombia 15 years ago. She had been a piano teacher there, working at a prestigious music academy in Bogota. She'd loved that job, loved watching young fingers learn to coax beauty from ivory keys. But when her daughter got sick, really sick, Maria had made the desperate choice to come to America. The treatment here was better, or so everyone said. Maybe it would save her. It didn't. Her daughter passed away 5 years ago, and Maria stayed in the United States working whatever job she could find. She sent most of her money back home to her 2 grandchildren, trying to give them the life their mother couldn't. The piano teacher she used to be felt like someone from another lifetime. Here she was just the help. One Thursday afternoon, Maria was cleaning the music room on the 2nd floor. It was her least favorite task because of what the room represented. A beautiful grand piano sat in the center, its black surface so polished you could see your reflection in it. Mrs. Blackwood had played it almost every day, filling the house with music. Now it sat silent, gathering dust despite Maria's weekly cleaning. It felt wrong, like keeping a caged bird that was meant to sing. She was running her cloth over the keys when she heard the soft shuffle of feet behind her. Daniel stood in the doorway, his head tilted slightly as he listened to the space around him. His white cane tapped gently against the floor. He was small for his age, with dark hair that always seemed to need cutting and pale skin from spending too much time indoors. "Hello?" he said quietly. "It's just Maria, sweetheart," she replied, straightening up. "I'm cleaning the piano." Daniel's face brightened a little. He navigated carefully into the room, his cane sweeping in small arcs. Can I touch it?" Maria's throat tightened. "Of course you can." She watched as he made his way to the piano bench and sat down. His small hands reached out tentatively until they found the smooth keys. He pressed one key, a single note that hung in the air like a question. Then he pressed another and another, just listening to each sound as if he was trying to understand something. A tear rolled down his cheek. Maria's heart cracked wide open. She'd seen a lot of sad things in her life. But this 8-year-old boy sitting at his dead mother's piano, crying over the sounds he was making, was almost too much to bear. She didn't think. She just acted. Maria sat down beside him on the bench. "May I show you something?" Daniel nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand. She took his right hand gently and positioned his fingers on the keys. "These 3 notes, when you play them together like this, they make a happy sound. Try it." He pressed them down and his eyes widened behind the fog that clouded them. "That's pretty." "That's called a chord," Maria explained. "And these 3 right here, they sound a little sad. But sometimes sad can be beautiful too." For the next 20 minutes, she showed him simple things. How to find middle C. How the black keys made different sounds than the white ones. How you could play the same note high or low on the piano, and it would sound completely different even though it was the same name. Daniel absorbed everything like a sponge. His fingers, unsure at first, became more confident. When Maria taught him a very simple melody, just 5 notes, he played it back to her perfectly after hearing it once. "You're a natural," she said softly. "Really?" His whole face transformed. Maria realized she might be looking at the first genuine smile this child had worn in months, maybe years. "Really?" They sat there together until Beth's voice called from downstairs, demanding to know where Daniel had gone. He scrambled up, suddenly nervous about being caught somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. "Maria," he whispered. Could we do this again?" She knew she should say no. This wasn't her job. She was hired to clean, not to teach. Mr. Blackwood might not like it. She could get fired for overstepping. But looking at this lonely little boy, this child who'd just discovered something that made him happy, she couldn't bring herself to refuse. "Tomorrow morning," she whispered back. "Before anyone else wakes up, 5:30. But it has to be our secret, okay?" Daniel nodded so hard his whole body moved. "Our secret." He practically bounced out of the room, using his cane to guide himself toward Beth's voice. Maria stayed behind, staring at the piano. What had she just agreed to? But deep down she knew. She'd agreed to do what no one else in this house was doing. She'd agreed to see this child, really see him. And that, she would soon learn, was going to change everything. Maria's alarm went off at 4:45 the next morning. She lay in her small apartment for a moment, wondering if Daniel would even remember their plan. Maybe he'd forget. Maybe he'd be too scared to sneak out of his room. Maybe this whole thing was a terrible idea. But at 5:30 sharp, she heard the soft tap-tap-tap of his cane in the hallway outside the music room. She opened the door to find him standing there in his pajamas, his face glowing with excitement. "You came," he whispered. "I promised, didn't I?" she whispered back. "Come on, let's not wake anyone." That morning marked the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. 6 days a week, Maria arrived an hour early to the Blackwood mansion. She'd make herself a quiet cup of coffee, then head upstairs to the music room where Daniel would be waiting. They had exactly 1 hour before Beth woke up and the rest of the household stirred to life. At first, Maria kept the lessons simple. She taught him how to sit properly at the piano, how to curve his fingers, how to use his whole body to create sound, not just his hands. For a blind child, she had to describe everything differently. She couldn't say, "Watch how I do it." Instead, she guided his hands, let him feel the movement of her fingers, had him place his small hand on top of hers so he could understand the motion. "Music isn't just about pressing the right keys," she told him one morning. "It's about feeling. Close your eyes." "Well, you know what I mean." They both giggled at that. Listen to the sound. Is it happy? Is it angry? Is it asking a question or giving an answer? Daniel understood in a way that amazed her. He had a gift, a real one. Within 2 weeks, he could play simple melodies with both hands. Within a month, he was reading basic rhythm patterns she taught him through clapping and counting. She'd clap a pattern and he'd clap it back, then translate it to the piano keys. The transformation in the boy was remarkable. The sad, lonely child who'd wandered the halls like a ghost was disappearing. Now Daniel smiled. He laughed. He'd practiced the exercises Maria gave him during the day when no one was paying attention, his fingers tapping out rhythms on tables and walls. Beth noticed he seemed happier, but assumed it was just a phase kids went through. Maria used part of her salary to buy him special music books written in Braille. They were expensive, and she had to order them from a specialty store in Boston. When she gave Daniel the first one, telling him it was a gift his mother had left for him before she died, he cried and hugged the book to his chest. "Do you think she can hear me play?" he asked Maria one morning, his fingers resting on the keys. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I think she hears every note, my dear boy, and I think she's very proud." By the 3rd month, Daniel was composing his own small pieces, simple things just a few measures long, but they were his. He'd tell Maria about his dreams, and she'd help him turn those feelings into music. When he was sad about his father being gone again, they'd create a slow, melancholy melody. When he was excited about a bird he heard singing outside his window, they'd make something light and cheerful. The music room became their secret world. It was the only place where Daniel wasn't the blind boy everyone pitied or ignored. Here he was just a student learning something he loved, and Maria wasn't just the maid. She was a teacher again, doing what she was meant to do. One morning, about 4 months into their lessons, they had a visitor. James, the head butler, appeared in the doorway at 6 o'clock. Maria's heart dropped. They'd been discovered. She stood up quickly, ready to apologize, ready to beg him not to tell Mr. Blackwood. But James just stood there listening. Daniel was playing a piece Maria had taught him, one of Mozart's simpler sonatas. His small fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence, only stumbling occasionally. When he finished, James wiped his eyes. "How long has this been going on?" he asked quietly. 4 months, Maria admitted. "Please, James, don't tell Mr. Blackwood. I know I'm overstepping, but Daniel loves it so much and he's so talented and I couldn't just—" James held up his hand. "I'm not going to tell anyone." He looked at Daniel, who was sitting very still at the piano bench, his face worried. Mrs. Blackwood would have wanted this. She always said this house needed music. He turned to leave, then paused. "I'll make sure you're not interrupted in the mornings. And Maria, thank you for caring about the boy." After that, their secret had one more keeper. James would sometimes stand in the hallway, just out of sight, listening to Daniel's progress. Once he left a stack of sheet music on the piano bench with a note that said, "From Mrs. Blackwood's collection." Daniel's skills grew week by week. Maria started teaching him more complex pieces, carefully chosen for his level. She taught him scales, arpeggios, and music theory using a combination of braille, touch, and endless repetition. He never complained. He never got bored. He soaked up everything she offered like he'd been starving for it his whole life. Maestra Maria, he started calling her during their lessons. It was Spanish for Teacher Maria, and it made her heart swell every time she heard it. "Mi pequeño maestro," she'd reply. "My little master." But good things, as Maria knew from experience, don't always last. She and Daniel had been lucky for 6 months. 6 months of early mornings, secret lessons, and watching this beautiful child bloom like a flower that had finally found sunlight. 6 months of feeling like she had purpose again, like she was doing something that mattered. She should have known it couldn't last forever. On a cold November morning, Maria heard it first. The sound of the front door opening way too early. Heavy footsteps in the hallway below. A familiar voice calling for James. Mr. Blackwood was home, and he wasn't supposed to be back until tonight. Daniel's fingers froze over the keys. They looked at each other, and Maria saw her own fear reflected in the boy's face. The footsteps were coming upstairs, coming closer. There was no time to hide, no time to run. They were caught. The music room door swung open, and Richard Blackwood stood there in his travel clothes, his face showing the exhaustion of a long flight and the confusion of a man hearing his dead wife's favorite song being played in his house at 6 in the morning. His eyes moved from the piano to his son, then landed on Maria. "What?" he said slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is going on here?" The silence in the music room felt like it lasted forever. Maria could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Daniel's hands had fallen from the piano keys into his lap, and his head was bowed like he was waiting for punishment. Richard Blackwood stood in the doorway, still wearing his business suit from the flight. His tie was loosened, his eyes were bloodshot from jet lag, but his expression was sharp and alert. He looked from his son to Maria and back again, trying to piece together what he'd just witnessed. "I asked you a question," he said, stepping into the room. "What is this?" Maria stood up quickly, smoothing down her uniform. Her mouth felt dry. "Mr. Blackwood, I can explain—" "Papa, please don't be angry." Daniel's voice came out small and frightened. He turned on the piano bench toward where his father's voice had come from. "Maestra Maria has been teaching me piano. I asked her to. Please don't blame her, Maestra." Richard's eyebrows shot up. "You've been teaching my son?" He turned his full attention to Maria, and she felt herself shrinking under his gaze. "How long has this been going on?" 6 months, sir." Maria forced herself to stand straight to meet his eyes, even though everything in her wanted to look at the floor. "I should have asked your permission. I know that. But Daniel came to the music room one day and he was so drawn to the piano, and I just thought—" "You thought what?" Richard's voice was getting louder now. "That you could make decisions about my son without consulting me? You're the housekeeper, not a teacher, not a nanny, not family." Each word hit Maria like a slap, but she'd expected this. She'd known from the first day that this moment might come. "You're right. I overstepped. I'm sorry, Papa, no." Daniel stood up from the piano bench so fast he almost knocked it over. His white cane clattered to the floor. "Don't fire her, please. She's the only one who—" He stopped, his lips trembling. "The only one who what?" Richard asked, his voice softening slightly as he looked at his son. "The only one who sees me?" Daniel whispered. Everyone else in this house treats me like I'm made of glass or like I'm invisible. But Maestra Maria, she treats me like I'm just a regular kid. She listens to me. She believes in me. Tears were streaming down his face now. Music is the only thing that makes me happy anymore. The only thing, and she gave that to me. Richard's jaw tightened. Maria could see him struggling with something, some emotion he was trying to keep locked down. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long breath. "Daniel, go to your room," he said finally. "But Papa, now. We'll talk about this later." Daniel's face crumpled. He bent down, feeling around for his cane. Maria wanted to help him, but she didn't dare move. The boy found it, then turned in her direction. "Maestra Maria, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for, mi pequeño maestro," Maria said softly. "Nothing at all." Daniel left the room, tapping his way down the hallway. The sound of his cane grew fainter and fainter until it disappeared entirely. Maria and Richard stood alone in the music room, the piano between them like a silent witness. "Sit down," Richard said, gesturing to the bench. Maria sat, her hands folded in her lap. She kept her back straight, maintaining what little dignity she had left. Richard paced to the window and stared out at the grounds. "My wife played that song you were teaching him. It was her favorite. I haven't heard it in 2 years. His voice was rough, like the words were being dragged out of him. When I walked in and heard it, for a second I thought—" He didn't finish the sentence. "I didn't know," Maria said quietly. "Daniel chose it from the sheet music James left for us. If I had known, I wouldn't have—" "James knew about this?" Richard turned around sharply. Maria realized her mistake too late. "Please don't blame him either. He only found out recently, and he didn't tell anyone because he thought it was good for Daniel." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "So my entire staff has been keeping secrets from me. Wonderful." He walked over to the piano and ran his hand along its surface. "How did this start?" Maria told him everything. The day she found Daniel in the music room crying as he pressed the keys. The decision to teach him just once, then again, then the early morning lessons that became routine. She told him about Daniel's natural talent, his dedication, his joy when he played. She told him about the Braille music books she'd bought with her own money, the compositions Daniel was creating, the way music had brought light into his dark world. Richard listened without interrupting. His face was unreadable. "I was a piano teacher in Colombia," Maria continued, "before I came here. I taught at a music academy for 12 years. I know I'm just the help here, and I had no right to do what I did. But Mr. Blackwood, your son, is gifted, really gifted, and he was so lonely. And I just wanted to give him something, anything that would make him feel less alone." "So you felt sorry for him," Richard said flatly. "No." Maria shook her head firmly. "I saw him. There's a difference between pity and recognition. I saw a child with potential that no one was nurturing. I saw someone who needed purpose and passion. I saw what he could become if someone just paid attention." Something flickered across Richard's face. Pain maybe, or shame, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Pack your things," he said finally. "I'll give you a week's severance pay. I want you gone by Sunday." Maria had expected this, but hearing the words still hurt. She nodded.
"May I say goodbye to Daniel?"
"No, it'll be easier for him if you just go." Richard moved toward the door. "I'll have James prepare your final check." "Mr. Blackwood," Maria said, standing up. "Please don't take music away from him. Even if you're angry at me, don't punish him for my mistake. He needs this." Richard paused at the doorway, his back to her. "You don't get to tell me what my son needs. You're dismissed." He walked out, leaving Maria alone in the music room. She sat back down at the piano bench, her hands resting on the keys Daniel had been playing just minutes before. Tears finally came, but she wiped them away quickly. She'd known this could happen. She'd taken the risk anyway because Daniel needed someone to take that risk for him. From somewhere in the house, she heard the faint sound of crying. Daniel in his room, sobbing for the music lessons he was losing and the one person who'd made him feel seen. Maria closed the piano's fallboard gently, covering the keys one last time. She'd been fired from the Blackwood mansion. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Richard Blackwood wasn't done with her yet. Not even close. Maria spent the next 3 days in a fog. She continued her work at the mansion, cleaning rooms that suddenly felt emptier than before. The other staff members whispered when she walked by. They knew something had happened, but no one knew exactly what. James gave her sympathetic looks but kept his distance, probably worried about his own job. The worst part was Daniel. The boy refused to leave his room. Beth reported that he wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk, wouldn't do anything except sit by his window. At night, Maria could hear him crying through the walls. Once she stood outside his door with her hand raised to knock, but she couldn't do it. Mr. Blackwood had forbidden her from saying goodbye. She'd already caused enough trouble, but what Maria didn't know was that Richard Blackwood wasn't sleeping either. For 3 days, he barely left his study. The staff heard him on the phone at all hours, his voice muffled through the heavy oak door. Papers and files covered his desk. His meals went cold, untouched on the tray James brought. On the second day, Richard had called the Juilliard School in New York. He'd been transferred 3 times before reaching someone in the admissions department. "I need to speak with someone about evaluating a young pianist," he'd said. "Someone who can tell me if a child has real talent or if I'm being sold a fantasy." The woman on the phone had been helpful but cautious. "How old is the child?" 8, and he's blind." There was a pause. "I see. We do have professors who specialize in working with students who have disabilities. But Mr. Blackwood, 8 is very young for a formal evaluation." "I have recordings," Richard had said. He'd pulled up his phone, where he'd secretly recorded Daniel playing that morning through the crack in the music room door. "Can I send them to you?" That evening, he'd sent audio files to Juilliard, to the New England Conservatory, and to 3 renowned private piano instructors whose names he'd found through his business contacts. Then he waited. The responses started coming back on the 3rd day. The first email was from a professor at the New England Conservatory. Richard read it twice, then 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Mr. Blackwood, I've listened to your recordings with great interest. The child in these recordings displays remarkable musicality for his age. More importantly, his technical foundation is excellent. Whoever has been teaching him understands not just how to play piano, but how to teach it. The fact that he's blind makes his achievement even more noteworthy. This is not amateur work. This is a child with genuine potential, receiving genuine instruction." The second email came from Juilliard. It was even more enthusiastic. "What struck me most wasn't the technical skill, though that's certainly impressive for an 8-year-old. It was the emotional depth. This child doesn't just play notes. He feels the music. He understands it in a way that many adult students never achieve. That kind of teaching is rare and precious. You should be very proud of whoever is working with him." Richard sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. All this time, he'd thought Maria was just the housekeeper, someone to clean floors and dust furniture. He'd barely looked at her in 3 years. How could he have known she was capable of this? That's when he made another call. This one to a private investigator his company sometimes used for background checks on business partners. "I need you to find out everything you can about someone," Richard said. "Maria Torres. She works for me. Has for 3 years. I need to know who she was before she came to Connecticut." The investigator promised results within 24 hours. The next morning, a thick file arrived by courier. Richard opened it in his study and started reading. With each page, he felt worse about himself. Maria Torres, age 52, former instructor at the Academia Nacional de Música in Bogotá, Colombia, 12 years of teaching experience. Her students had won regional and national youth piano competitions. Letters of recommendation from the Academy's director praised her patience, her skill, and her ability to connect with students of all levels. She'd left Colombia 15 years ago when her daughter, Lucia, was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. Maria had sold everything she owned to bring Lucia to the United States for treatment. She'd worked 3 jobs, lived in a tiny apartment, and spent every penny on doctors and hospitals. Lucia died 5 years ago. She was 31. After that, Maria had stayed in the United States, sending most of her earnings back to Colombia to support Lucia's 2 children, her grandchildren. She lived alone in a studio apartment in town, worked 6 days a week, and volunteered on Sundays at a local community center teaching basic piano to underprivileged kids. Richard closed the file and put his head in his hands. This woman had lost everything. Her career, her country, her daughter, and still, she'd found it in her heart to care about his son. To wake up early every morning for 6 months, not for money or recognition, but because she saw a lonely child who needed someone. What had he done? He'd called her just the housekeeper. He'd dismissed her like she was nothing. He thought about the past 2 years since his wife died. He'd thrown himself into work, telling himself it was necessary, that he had a company to run, that Daniel would be fine with the nanny and the staff. But the truth was uglier than that. Work was easier than grief. Conference calls were easier than watching his blind son struggle. Business trips were easier than sitting with his own failure as a father. Maria hadn't just taught Daniel piano. She'd done what Richard himself had failed to do. She'd shown up. She'd paid attention. She'd cared. On the fourth morning, Richard asked James to bring Maria to his study. James looked surprised, but nodded. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Richard said. Maria entered, her face carefully neutral. She was dressed in her uniform, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked tired, Richard noticed. Probably not sleeping any better than he was. "Sit down, please," Richard said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Maria sat, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at him with those steady dark eyes, waiting. Richard picked up the folder from the investigator. "I had someone look into your background." Her expression didn't change. "I see. You were a respected teacher in Colombia. You gave all that up to take care of your daughter." He paused. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Maria said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me? When I hired you, why didn't you mention your experience?" "You were looking for a housekeeper, not a piano teacher," Maria said simply. "I needed the job. My credentials didn't matter for washing floors." Richard flinched at that. "I also contacted several music schools. I sent them recordings of Daniel playing. Would you like to know what they said?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Maria's face. "If you wish to tell me, they said my son is gifted. They said whoever's teaching him is doing exceptional work." Richard leaned forward. "They said he doesn't just play music. He understands it, feels it, and that's rare." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "He is special. I told you that." "You did." Richard stood up and walked to the window, the same spot where he'd stood 4 days ago when his world turned upside down. "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Why did you do it, really?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to be invisible," she finally said. "And I couldn't watch another day of that beautiful child being invisible in his own home." Richard turned around. His eyes were red and his voice cracked when he spoke. "I failed him, didn't I? That's not for me to say, Mr. Blackwood. Please, call me Richard. And yes, it is for you to say. You've earned that right." He walked back to his desk, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he picked up a folder and handed it to Maria. "Open it." With shaking hands, Maria opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, contracts, letters from music schools. She looked up at Richard, confused. "What is this?" "That," Richard said, "is me trying to do the right thing for once. But I need to know if you'll help me." Maria stared at the papers in her hands, trying to make sense of what she was reading. Contract, salary, benefits, position, private music instructor. The numbers made her dizzy. It was 5 times what she'd been making as a housekeeper. "I don't understand," she whispered. Richard sat down across from her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked almost vulnerable. "I'm offering you a job. A real job. Teaching Daniel. Officially, with a proper salary, health insurance, retirement benefits. Everything you should have had from the beginning." Maria's hands trembled. "Mr. Blackwood, Richard, I don't know what to say." "There's more." He pulled out another folder. "I want to start a music school. A real one here in town. Free lessons for kids who can't afford them. Kids with disabilities. Kids who get overlooked by everyone else, just like Daniel was." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you to run it. To be the director. To hire teachers. To decide who gets in and what they learn." The papers slipped from Maria's fingers and scattered across the desk. "You want me to run a school?" "My wife loved music. It was her whole life before we got married. After Daniel was born blind, she used to say that music would be his gift, his way of seeing the world." Richard's eyes were wet now. "Then she got sick and I got scared and I buried myself in work because I didn't know how to handle any of it. I abandoned my son. I let him sit in this big house alone and invisible, just like you said. Richard, let me finish. Please." He took a shaky breath. "You did what I should have been doing all along. You saw him. You gave him purpose and joy and a reason to wake up in the morning. You gave him his mother's gift without even knowing that's what you were doing." A tear rolled down his cheek. "You saved my son. And in doing that, You showed me what kind of father I've become, what kind of father I need to stop being. Maria couldn't stop her own tears now. He's a wonderful boy. He just needed someone to notice, and I'm noticing now. I'm cutting back my travel, way back. Daniel needs me here, and I need to be here. Richard wiped his face with the back of his hand. But he also needs you. Will you stay? Will you keep teaching him? Not as the housekeeper sneaking around at 5 in the morning, but as his teacher, his maestra Maria. Maria looked at this man who'd terrified her just 4 days ago. Now he sat in front of her, broken open by grief and guilt and hope all mixed together. She thought about Daniel crying in his room, thinking he'd lost the one good thing in his life. She thought about her daughter, who would have wanted her to say yes to this. To choose love and music and second chances, yes, she said softly. Yes, I'll stay. Richard's whole body sagged with relief. Thank you. Thank you. He stood up quickly. There's someone who needs to know. Come with me. They walked upstairs together, Richard leading the way to Daniel's room. He knocked gently. Daniel, it's Papa. I have someone here who wants to see you. Go away, came the muffled reply. Please, son, just open the door. There was silence, then the sound of small feet padding across the floor. The door opened a crack. Daniel's face was puffy from crying, his hair sticking up in all directions. When he heard Maria's breathing, his whole body went rigid. Maestra Maria, his voice was barely a whisper. Hello, mi pequeño maestro, Maria said, her voice breaking. Daniel launched himself forward, and Maria caught him in her arms. He sobbed into her shoulder while she held him tight, stroking his hair, murmuring to him in Spanish that everything was okay, that she wasn't leaving, that she would never leave him. Richard watched them, and something in his chest cracked open. This was what love looked like. This was what his son needed. This was what he'd been too blind to see. Daniel, he said gently, Maestra Maria isn't going anywhere. She's going to keep teaching you. Every day. And not in secret anymore. We're going to get you the best piano, the best books, everything you need. Daniel pulled back from Maria, his face confused. Really? You're not firing her? No, I'm promoting her. Richard knelt down so he was at his son's level. And I'm going to be here too. No more trips every week. No more locked doors. I want to hear you play. I want to be part of this. You do? Daniel's voice was small and hopeful. I do. I've been a terrible father, Daniel. I left you alone when you needed me most. But I'm going to do better. We're going to do better. Together. Daniel reached out, feeling for his father's face. Richard took his son's hands and held them. I love you, Richard said. I should have said that every day. I should have shown you. I'm so sorry. Father and son hugged for the first time in what felt like years. Maria stepped back, giving them space, her heart so full she thought it might burst. 3 months later, the Catherine Blackwood Music Academy opened its doors. Catherine had been Richard's wife's name. The building was beautiful, with 6 practice rooms, 2 performance spaces, and a dozen top-quality pianos. Maria hired 4 other teachers, all of them passionate about working with kids who needed extra support. On opening day, Daniel gave a small performance for the families who'd enrolled their children. He played 3 pieces, including the one his mother had loved. His fingers flew across the keys with confidence and joy. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Richard stood in the back, tears streaming down his face. James stood beside him, both of them watching this miracle unfold. The blind boy who'd been invisible for so long was now shining bright for everyone to see. After the performance, a reporter from the local newspaper asked Richard why he'd started the school. He looked at Maria, who was helping Daniel off the stage, her hand on his shoulder, her face glowing with pride. Someone taught me that the people we overlook are often the ones who see us most clearly, Richard said. My housekeeper became my son's teacher and showed me what I'd been missing. She didn't just teach him piano. She taught me how to be present, how to notice, how to love better. He paused, watching Daniel laugh at something Maria whispered to him. This school is here because one woman decided that my son deserved to be seen. And now we're going to make sure every child who walks through those doors knows they're seen too. 5 years later, the school had taught over 500 children. Daniel, at 13, performed his first public concert at a real theater. He dedicated every piece to Maestra Maria, who sat in the front row wiping happy tears from her eyes. Her grandchildren, now living with her in a house Richard had helped her buy, sat beside her. They'd started piano lessons too. The cycle continued. After the concert, a young reporter asked Daniel what piano meant to him. He smiled. That same smile Maria had first seen on an 8-year-old boy pressing piano keys and crying. "Piano taught me that being blind doesn't mean living in darkness," he said. "It taught me that someone caring enough to see you, really see you, can change everything." Maestra Maria gave me music. But more than that, she gave me a reason to believe I could be something more than just the blind kid everyone felt sorry for. Richard, standing backstage, heard those words and felt grateful for the day he'd come home early. Grateful for the moment he'd heard his wife's song being played. Grateful for the anger that led to investigation, that led to understanding, that led to change. Sometimes the best things in life come from being knocked off balance. From having your world turned upside down by someone you never expected. From learning that help doesn't always come in the package you anticipated. Maria had been just a housekeeper. Now she was family, and that made all the difference. 10 years had passed since that cold November morning when everything changed. Daniel was now 18, preparing for his final recital before heading to the Juilliard School on a full scholarship. The boy who'd once wandered the mansion halls like a ghost was now a confident young man, whose name was starting to appear in classical music magazines. But this story isn't just about Daniel. It's about what happens when one act of kindness creates waves that reach farther than anyone could imagine. Maria stood in her office at the Catherine Blackwood Music Academy, looking at the wall of photographs. Hundreds of faces smiled back at her. Kids of all ages, all backgrounds, all abilities. Some were in wheelchairs. Some had hearing aids. Some had conditions that made their hands shake or their bodies move differently. And some, like Daniel, couldn't see at all. Every single one of them had found something here. A place where they belonged. Where they were seen. "Maestra Maria," a voice called from the doorway. It was Sophie, a 17-year-old girl who'd come to the academy 6 years ago. She'd been born with cerebral palsy, and most music schools had turned her away, saying she'd never be able to play properly. Now she was one of Maria's finest students, adapting techniques to work with her body instead of against it. "Yes, my dear?" Maria turned from the wall. "There's someone here to see you. She says it's important." Maria walked to the reception area and found a woman in her mid-30s nervously clutching a folder. She had a little girl with her, maybe 7 years old, who was holding tightly to her mother's hand. "Can I help you?" Maria asked gently. The woman's eyes filled with tears immediately. "I hope so. My name is Patricia Chen. This is my daughter, Lily." She looked down at the little girl. Lily lost her hearing 2 years ago. Meningitis. The doctors say she'll never hear again. Maria's heart squeezed. She knelt down to Lily's level. The child watched her with curious eyes. Maria signed hello in American Sign Language, and Lily's face lit up. She signed back enthusiastically. "She wants to learn piano," Patricia continued. "I know it sounds crazy. How can a deaf child learn music? But she's obsessed with it. She puts her hands on my phone when I play videos, feeling the vibrations. She stands next to our neighbor's piano with her hands on the wood. I've taken her to 4 different music schools and they all said no. That it's impossible. That I'm setting her up for disappointment." Maria stood up, her mind already racing. Did they really say impossible? Every single one. Then they weren't listening. Maria smiled at Lily. "We don't believe in impossible here. We believe in different. Will you both come with me?" She led them to a practice room where a young man was working with another student. The young man was Daniel, now teaching at the academy between his own studies. The student was a 10-year-old boy with Down syndrome, and together they were working through a simplified version of a classical piece. Patricia watched in amazement as Daniel, without sight, guided the boy's hands with such patience and understanding. When they finished, both teacher and student were grinning. "Daniel," Maria called. "Come meet someone." Daniel made his way over, his cane moving smoothly. He'd learned every inch of this building by heart. "Hello," he said warmly. "I heard we have visitors." "This is Lily," Maria said. "She'd like to learn piano." "She's deaf." Daniel's face broke into an enormous smile. "Well, that's perfect. Do you know who one of the greatest musicians in history was? Beethoven. And he was deaf when he wrote some of his most beautiful music. Music isn't just about hearing, Lily, it's about feeling." Over the next hour, Maria and Daniel showed Patricia and Lily what was possible. They had special equipment, pianos modified with vibration pads that let students feel the music through their bodies. They had visual programs that showed sound waves and patterns. Most importantly, they had teachers who understood that different didn't mean less. By the time Patricia and Lily left, they'd enrolled for lessons starting the following week. Patricia hugged Maria so tightly neither of them could breathe properly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing her." Those words echoed in Maria's mind for the rest of the day. Thank you for seeing her. That's what this had always been about. That evening, Richard found Maria in her office, still staring at the photographs on the wall. He'd aged well, his hair gray now, but his face softer than it had been a decade ago. He spent half his time at the academy these days, having handed over most of his business operations to trusted partners. "Big day tomorrow," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Daniel's final recital." "He's ready," Maria said. "More than ready. Your son is going to do amazing things, Richard." "Our son," Richard corrected gently. It had become a running joke between them, but it was also true. Maria had been more of a parent to Daniel than anyone else, including Richard himself, for those lost years. "I enrolled another student today," Maria said. "A deaf girl who's been turned away from 4 schools." Richard shook his head. "Their loss, our gain. How many does that make now? With Lily? 643. In 10 years, we've taught 643 kids who might have gone their whole lives thinking they weren't good enough for music. Because of you," Richard said. "Because of us," Maria corrected. "You wrote the checks. You built the building. You gave these kids a place to belong. I wrote checks. You changed lives. There's a difference." Richard leaned forward. "Do you ever think about that first morning? When I caught you and Daniel?" Maria laughed softly. "I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything. And instead I found everything." She looked at the photographs again. Every single face on this wall is someone who was told they couldn't, that they shouldn't try. That music wasn't for people like them, and every single one proved those people wrong. Richard was quiet for a moment. "I got a call today, from a reporter at the New York Times. They want to do a feature on the Academy, on you specifically. They're calling you a pioneer in accessible music education." Maria waved her hand dismissively. "I'm just a teacher. You're so much more than that. You're proof that it only takes one person who decides to care. One person who decides to see what everyone else overlooks." He smiled. "You didn't just teach my son piano, Maria. You taught a whole community that disability doesn't mean inability, that different doesn't mean less, that every child deserves to be seen." The next evening, Daniel performed his final recital to a packed theater. His fingers flew across the keys with the confidence of someone who'd spent thousands of hours practicing. But more than technical skill, his playing had something else. Soul. Emotion. The kind of depth that only comes from truly understanding music. In the audience, Maria sat surrounded by her extended family. Her grandchildren, now teenagers themselves and both accomplished pianists. James, the butler who'd kept their secret all those years ago, now retired but still showing up for every important academy event. Sophie, Patricia, Lily, and dozens of other students and families whose lives had been touched by this place. And next to Maria sat Richard, tears streaming down his face as he listened to his son play. His son who was supposed to spend his life invisible, overlooked, pitied. His son who was now about to attend one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. When Daniel finished, the audience rose as one. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Daniel stood at the piano, his face glowing with joy, and he spoke into the microphone. "This music, everything I am, exists because one person decided I was worth her time. Maestra Maria saw me when I was invisible. She gave me music when I had nothing. She showed me that my blindness wasn't a limitation, but just a different way of experiencing the world." His voice cracked with emotion. "If there's anything I want to do with my life, it's to be for someone else what she was for me. To see someone who feels invisible and show them they matter." Maria couldn't hold back her tears. Around her, people were crying too. Not sad tears, but the kind that come from witnessing something beautiful and true. After the recital, as people mingled and celebrated, a young woman approached Maria. She looked nervous, holding her phone up. "Excuse me, are you Maestra Maria?" "I am. I saw a video about this place online. About what you do here." "I have a brother with autism. He's 11 and he's obsessed with music, but every teacher we've found says he's too difficult, too disruptive." The woman's voice shook. "Is it true that you don't turn kids away?" Maria took the woman's hand and smiled. "Bring him in. Let's see what he can do. Because that's what this was all about, seeing people, really seeing them. And once you start, you realize the world is full of invisible people just waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to care. One housekeeper had seen one lonely boy, and from that single moment of compassion, hundreds of lives had changed. The ripples were still spreading.